We were never told the full truth about the cross. At school, in church, in textbooks, even in sermons, it was always presented as a simple sign of love and sacrifice. But ancient writings and forgotten archives reveal another face of this symbol. The cross does not only save, it judges. And when it is lifted above the world, it becomes a weapon against empires and kingdoms. The Bible speaks about this directly, yet translators have hidden the details. In the prophetic books, the cross is described as a banner of victory over everything that rises against God. It is not only the wood of Golgotha. It is a standard that splits history into two parts, before and after. No other sign carries such power. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, so you will not miss what comes next. Because what you are about to hear may forever change how you see history. We were told the cross is only about personal faith. But look closely, and you will see that it always marked political turning points. When empires collapsed, when nations rose up, when people gained freedom, the cross stood at the center. And blood and judgment always followed it. We were taught that Jesus died on the cross, and that was the end of the story. But in truth, it was only the beginning. From that day on, this symbol became an instrument that divides the world. And this division did not end 2,000 years ago. It continues today. The archives tell a different story. Early chronicles show that in the first centuries after Christ, the cross was not seen as decoration or jewelry but as a weapon. It was carved on doors to ward off persecutors. It was etched into battlefields by soldiers who believed it brought victory. It was a sign of power, a sign that terrified enemies. Even now, the cross appears wherever power is contested. Look at the flags of Europe. How many nations carry it as their central emblem? The Scandinavian states, Switzerland, even Great Britain. They say it is only history. But is it really just history, when this symbol still shapes the identity and politics of whole nations? And so the question arises, what if we are living in the very days the prophets warned about? The cross is not only a relic of the past. It has become the banner of the present. When armies march into battle, they raise it again on their shields. When politicians want to stress their authority, they place it in their speeches and emblems. When peoples want to proclaim their unity, they return to it as their central image. Prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the book of Revelation, a banner is described that will appear before all nations at the end. The sign of the Son of Man in the heavens. Could this be the same cross that once split history in two? In ancient times, the cross delivered judgment on empires. Rome tried to use it as an instrument of shame, but that very symbol became the beginning of Rome's downfall. Through the cross, the empire that seemed eternal began to lose its grip. And history repeats itself. Every empire that lifts itself in pride eventually meets the cross. What we were taught about this symbol turned out to be only half the truth. Alongside the story of mercy and salvation runs another story, a story of judgment, collapse, and blood. And when we see the cross used again today, in flags, in emblems, in political speeches, we must ask, is it truly a sign of peace, or is it the sign of a coming verdict? The real reason never made it into textbooks. Because then we would have to admit that we are not living in an age of stability, but in an age of judgment. Look at the world today. When Russia invaded Ukraine, both sides turned to the cross. Russian troops carried banners with religious images. Ukrainian chaplains blessed their soldiers with the same sign. Both claimed truth was on their side. And this only proves one thing: the cross has not vanished. It has once again become a battlefield. In the United States, politicians raise the cross as a weapon in the fight against moral decline, while others point to it as proof of the church's hypocrisy. In Israel, the cross is set against the Star of David. In the Muslim world, it remains a reminder of the Crusades, still feared by entire nations. Official statements are only a mask. They claim it is about culture, tradition, or heritage. But in reality, it is a struggle for control over the world. The cross is both weapon and judgment. It was never only about love. It was always a sign of division. It lifts up, or it casts down. And as we move closer to the climax of history, this sign will weigh more heavily on politics, on religion, and on the life of every person. This revelation changes everything. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And when we see the cross lifted over the world, we must remember, it is not only a reminder of Golgotha. It is a reminder of the final judgment that is coming. We were always told, Rome embraced the cross as a symbol of peace. But that is a lie. Rome never sought peace. It sought power. And when the empire realized that this symbol was uniting the masses, it decided to make it its own. The cross, which was once a verdict against Rome itself, was turned by emperors into a mark of their legitimacy. When Constantine supposedly saw the cross in the sky, it was not a spiritual revelation. It was a political move. Rome was losing control, and it needed a new ideology to keep its people in submission. They chose the cross. We were told this was the conversion of the empire. In reality, it was the theft of a symbol. The cross that condemned the pride of emperors was reshaped into the imperial seal. Think about it, how could an instrument of execution, a sign of shame and judgment, become the banner of an empire? How could the death of an innocent man turn into an ornament for a throne? The answer is clear. Rome could not destroy the cross, so it decided to claim it. And it was not the first time. Empires have always stolen sacred signs to keep people under control. Assyria used statues of gods to terrify conquered nations. Rome used the cross to dominate millions. The archives tell a different story. In the first centuries, the cross was the mark of an underground faith, a symbol of resistance. People died for it. Yet within a few decades, it became the official emblem of the empire that continued to kill. This was not a miracle. It was strategy. The emperors understood, if you cannot destroy a movement, you must lead it. And they did. The cross became Rome's shield, a cover for conquest. In its name, the empire built temples, while crushing nations that refused to submit. Everything we were told about Rome's alliance with the cross was a lie. It was not an alliance. It was a theft. Look at history repeating itself. The United States cloaks its wars in words about democracy, but behind them lie oil and control. Russia covers its aggression with talk of traditional values, but behind them lies the hunger for empire. The European Union speaks of peace and unity, but it wields economic sanctions as a weapon against entire countries. Today, just as 2,000 years ago, great powers use symbols of faith to justify their grip on the world. The prophets warned of this long ago. In the book of Daniel, a beast rises from the sea to subdue all nations. Authority is given to him over every tribe and language. Is this not the very image of an empire lifting the cross above itself to proclaim its greatness? Rome declared, "The cross belongs to us." And millions believed it. But those who saw the true face of the symbol knew, it was a verdict. The empire that stole the cross was doomed to fall. A scandal so great that even the churches remained silent. Because if we admit that Rome used the cross for control, then we must admit, the same pattern is alive today. World leaders have always known this truth. They know that symbols move the masses. They know that faith is stronger than weapons. And that is why they keep lifting ancient signs above their armies. So here's the question, what if the cross we see today on flags and coats of arms is not about salvation, but about control? Are you ready to admit that empires never change, they only disguise themselves? Look at the war in Ukraine. Russian propaganda paints crosses on tanks and churches to mask aggression. Look at the Middle East. There the cross still stirs hatred, reminding Muslims of the bloody Crusades. Look at Europe. Their far-right movements raise it to define their so-called Christian identity against migrants. The official church says it is only tradition. But when a symbol becomes a tool of division, it turns into a weapon. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. Every new power repeats Rome's pattern: steal the symbol, reshape its meaning, place it above their armies, and declare, "Now it is ours." This reminds us, the cross always stands against empires. It either judges them, or it becomes their weapon. But the verdict always comes. Treaties once called peace became sentences of judgment. The history of Rome proved it. The history of modern alliances confirms it. When Constantine raised the cross, he signed his empire's death warrant. Because the symbol of judgment can never be stolen. It always turns against those who try. And now the question remains, is the world today repeating the same mistake? We were told that all the apostles spoke with one voice about the meaning of the cross. But that is not true. The truth is that the first Christians had dozens of writings where the cross was described in very different ways. Most of those texts never made it into the canon. They were erased, burned, declared heresy. Today we know only 4 Gospels. But in the early centuries, there were many more: the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of the Hebrews. In these texts, the cross was not a decorative emblem but a cosmic sign of judgment. Words were spoken there that made empires vulnerable. And that is why they were hidden. We were taught one version. But the ancient texts tell another. In the Gospel of Peter, we read that at the moment of the crucifixion, the cross itself spoke and pronounced judgment on the world. Incredible, yes, but it shows how the first Christians saw the cross not as wood, but as a sign that judges kings and nations. That was dangerous for the empire, and dangerous for the church as it began to align itself with Rome. The official church erased these voices from the canon to preserve its authority. Because if the cross is a verdict against emperors, then who dares to sit on a throne? If the cross is judgment on nations, then who dares to claim that God's power belongs to them? It was a scandal swept under the rug. And we still live in its shadow. Look at our world today. Do the media not do the same? Inconvenient facts about wars vanish from the news cycle. Interviews that expose politicians are cut from broadcasts. Archives are rewritten. And we are told, this is the official story. Everything we were told about the unity of the Christian message turns out to be an illusion. The first communities fought bitterly. Some saw the cross as a symbol of mercy. Others as a sign of judgment. Some spoke of love. Others warned of the end of kingdoms. Why do we hear only one version today? Because history is written by the victors. The archives tell another story. In Nag Hammadi, in the Egyptian desert, a library of apocrypha was uncovered. Texts that paint a different picture of the cross survive there. In them, it appears as a secret key to the prophecies of the last days. The church rejected them, but their very existence proves that the early Christians were never of one mind. Now look at modern politics. Do not nations act the same way, erasing wrong versions of history to keep control? The United States hid documents about Vietnam and Iraq. Russia rewrites the story of the Second World War. China deletes memories of Tiananmen Square. And every time we are handed a canonical version of events. The real reason for this never made it into textbooks. Because if we knew the whole truth, we would see a very different world. The story of the cross shows that censorship always serves power. Power fears symbols. Because symbols can lift nations against empires. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. Isaiah spoke of the stone the builders rejected, the stone that became the cornerstone. The cross is that stone. They tried to cast it aside. They tried to bury it. But it returns, and it stands as the cornerstone of judgment on the world. And what if those hidden texts contain the key to understanding our own time? What if they explain why this symbol is once again raised over the earth? This revelation changes everything. Because it shows, truth was always divided. And the cross was always a sign that could never be monopolized. Look at today's churches. They are becoming corporations, selling the approved version of faith. They hide anything that could break their monopoly. And those who ask questions are branded heretics. The same thing happened 2,000 years ago. Official statements are only a mask. They say, the Bible is complete. No other texts exist. But archaeology proves otherwise. The Apocrypha exist. And they testify, the cross is not only mercy. It is weapon and judgment. Everything we were told about the alliance of church and state was only half the truth. Because the very church that should have witnessed to truth was the first to compromise with power. And those compromises continue today. The shadows of empires rise again. Just as Rome erased inconvenient gospels, so today nations erase inconvenient facts. Just as the church feared the symbol of judgment, so politicians fear the symbols of protest. All of this proves, we live in a world where the cross once again rises as a weapon. And once again it divides history in two. So let me ask you, should those texts have been hidden, or should they have remained as witnesses for us today? We were always told that rulers of every age honored the cross. But that is not true. In reality, most of them feared it. Because the cross was not only a sign of faith, it was a sign of judgment. Every king, every emperor, every dictator who tried to rise above the law of God sooner or later faced it. History proves, the cross is the symbol that punishes pride. When Rome tried to raise the cross as its banner, it marked the beginning of its decline. The empire lasted a few more centuries, but the rot had already begun. When Byzantium lifted the cross as its chief emblem, it too fell, brought down by the Ottomans. When European kings marched in the Crusades, they did not return in triumph, but with division and chaos in their own lands. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the book of Daniel it is written, kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall under God's judgment. Every kingdom that sets itself above the truth receives its sentence. The cross became that very sign of judgment. It reminds us, no empire is eternal. No throne stands forever. The archives tell a different story than the textbooks. We were taught that kings decorated their crowns with crosses to show piety. But the true reason was different. They wanted to tame the symbol that condemned their arrogance. They placed the cross on their crowns to convince the people that their rule was blessed. But the symbol itself declared, power that rises against truth will fall. Everything we were told about the alliance of throne and faith was a lie. It was not an alliance. It was a struggle. Kings tried to bend to their will the very sign that judged them. And every time it ended the same way, with their downfall. Look at the modern world. The Soviet Union tried to erase the cross from people's lives. Churches were shut down. Believers were persecuted. But the empire collapsed. The United States raises the cross as a symbol of American values, yet in its shadow it wages wars and exports chaos. Russia hides behind orthodoxy, yet its actions bring death and destruction. Every one of these powers tries to use the cross as cover. And every time, that same cross becomes their verdict. The real reason for this never made it into the textbooks. Because if we were shown that the cross always stood at the fall of empires, we would see the pattern. And that pattern is dangerous for any power. So-called peace treaties often became sentences of judgment. Remember the Peace of Westphalia, after which Europe slid into new conflicts. Remember the Yalta Conference, after which the Cold War began. Every peace agreement wrapped in religious symbolism ended in new divisions of the world. And at the center of it all stood the cross. The shadows of empires rise again. We see great powers straining to hold control, yet their alliances crack. The European Union faces crises. NATO is torn by inner conflict. Russia bleeds influence and resources. China wrestles with internal pressure. And every time the world begins to shake, the cross returns, on flags, in the words of politicians, in the hands of protesters. Official statements are only a mask. They say, this is culture, this is heritage. But when the same symbol appears again and again at the collapse of empires, can we still call it only culture? Or is it the sign of judgment, moving regardless of human explanations? Think about it. What if today we once again stand under the same verdict? The prophets warned, when nations repeat the sins of ancient kingdoms, they inherit the same end. And when we look at today's wars, at global crises, at the collapse of alliances, we see the pattern. And at the heart of that pattern, the cross rises once more. This revelation changes everything. Because it shows, the cross was never only a symbol of faith. It was, and remains, a verdict. A verdict on kings, on empires, on nations that exalt pride against the truth. And what about you? Do you believe we are now living in the time when that verdict is once again being pronounced on the empires of today? We were always told, the cross is a symbol of mercy. But when we look at history, we see another picture. The cross became a sign of war. A banner under which rivers of blood were spilled. And this did not happen on the margins of history, but at the very heart of European civilization. When Pope Urban called for the First Crusade, he promised forgiveness of sins to all who would take up the sword. Imagine this, the symbol that was meant to testify to the sacrifice of Christ was turned into a justification for mass killing. Hundreds of thousands marched east under the sign of the cross. They believed they were serving God, but their hands were soaked in blood. We were told those wars were fought for the Holy Land. In truth, they were battles for trade, territory, and power. The cross was raised as a banner for political games. The official church blessed the war. It did so publicly, in the squares, before the crowds. Priests stitched red crosses onto the garments of soldiers. And those soldiers marched out to kill, convinced they were carrying out the will of heaven. But the true aim was something else, control and dominion. It was a scandal the church still keeps silent about. Because to admit that the Crusades were a cover for political ambition is to admit that the symbol of mercy became the symbol of the sword. Everything we were told about those wars was half the truth. Yes, the soldiers captured Jerusalem. But they also slaughtered thousands of civilians, women, children, the elderly. The streets of Jerusalem ran with blood under the shadow of the cross. After that, can we still call it only a sign of mercy? The archives show another story. In the Chronicles of Eyewitnesses, we read how knights trampled over bodies while singing psalms, believing they were glorifying God. That was not piety. That was the abuse of a symbol meant to condemn violence. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the book of Isaiah it is written, "Woe to those who call evil good, and good evil." That is exactly what happened in the age of the Crusades. A symbol of good was twisted into justification for evil. Now look at our world today. Do we not see the same pattern? NATO calls its campaigns peace missions. Russia calls its invasions liberation. The United States justifies its wars as a fight for democracy. Loud words on the surface, but behind them lie control of lands, resources, and influence. Just as in the Middle Ages armies marched to kill under the sign of the cross, today they march under the sign of freedom or traditional values. The symbols may change, but the scheme is the same. The real reason for this never entered the textbooks. Because if it did, we would have to admit, wars almost always hide behind sacred slogans. Think about it. What if all the so-called alliances for peace we see today are simply new crusades? Not with sword and shield, but with sanctions, propaganda, and drones. Are modern alliances any different from the armies of knights who once wore red crosses? This revelation changes everything. Because it shows, the cross was always at the center of the struggle for power. And every time it was raised as a banner of peace, war followed. The prophets warned, when a symbol is corrupted, it is a sign that the end is near. For when the world begins calling black white and white black, only judgment remains. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. Just as the cross became the symbol of the sword in the Middle Ages, so today alliances raise it as cover for global control. History repeats itself. Official statements are only a mask. They say, we go to war for the sake of peace. But behind every mask lies the truth, it is always about control. And what about you? Can we still trust the words peace missions, when history proves they always hide the sword? We were always told, the cross is only a religious symbol. But that is not true. For centuries, this sign has been a key in the hands of secret societies, orders, and political elites. They did not use it for prayer, but for control. And the deeper we look into history, the clearer it becomes, the cross hides the codes of power. Masonic lodges, the Templars, shadowy orders that operated behind monarchies, all of them raised the cross as their mark. But the meaning they gave it had little to do with the words of the gospel. For them it was a sign of chosen status, a key to secret knowledge that separated them from ordinary people. We were taught that the cross unites. In reality, it often divided, insiders and outsiders, the initiated and the uninitiated. In these secret brotherhoods, it was not a sign of salvation but of authority. Not sacrifice, but control. The archives show another story. Ancient chronicles tell us that the Templars wore a red cross on white cloaks not as a sign of mercy, but as a seal that set them apart from other soldiers. They saw themselves as chosen, and all others as lesser. And the very church that once supported them later declared them heretics, for the order had lifted the symbol higher than the church itself. Everything we were told about these orders was half the truth. They were portrayed as pious knights. But their real purpose was money, influence, political power. The cross was their brand. And with that brand, they ruled the fears and faith of nations. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the book of Revelation we read of the mark of the beast, a sign of submission. Do we not see the same pattern echoed in history? When a sign meant to be God's becomes the instrument of elites to keep the rest in bondage? Now look at our world. The logos of global corporations carry the same archetypes. Red crosses on pharmaceutical giants. Plus signs in the names of banks, funds, and insurance agencies. This is no coincidence. It is the use of an ancient archetype to stir subconscious trust. They know this sign, in the human mind, is tied to power and to the promise of rescue. The real reason for this never appears in textbooks. Because then we would ask, why do those who control the world's wealth use the same symbols once carried by secret orders? Official statements are only a mask. They say, the Red Cross is about medicine, about aid. But why has this sign been at once a military emblem, a mark on imperial flags, and a logo for global corporations? The answer is simple: symbols have power. And that power is beyond the reach of elections or parliaments. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. As the orders once used the cross to control nations, so today the elites use it to control the masses. The form changes, but the scheme does not. Think about it. What if the signs we see every day, in advertising, on medicine boxes, in political campaigns, are new forms of the ancient code? Do they rule us today just as the Templars once ruled their soldiers? This revelation changes everything. Because it shows, the cross is not only religion. It is a language of power. A hidden code understood by those who rule the world from the shadows. The prophets warned, when what is holy is turned into a tool of darkness, judgment is near. Because then truth and falsehood intertwine until nations can no longer see where salvation ends, and the trap begins. And here we are. Modern corporations, political alliances, secret councils, they all carry the same archetypes. They have turned the symbol of faith into an instrument of manipulation. And what about you? Can the cross remain holy when it is used as a code for power and control? We were always told that the church was the great defender of the truth of the cross. But the truth is different. It was the very institutions of the church that often betrayed this symbol, turning it from a reminder of sacrifice and judgment into an instrument of power and business. From the earliest centuries, the church tried to monopolize the cross. It stopped being a mark of inner faith and became a seal of institutional authority. It was placed on pulpits, on the bishop's throne, on the crests of popes and patriarchs. But under that same sign, indulgences were sold, wars were fought, and alliances were struck with empires. We were told that the cross in the church is a symbol of love. In reality, it became an instrument of control. Whoever held it in their hands held power over the people. Because faith was so strong that any mark of the cross was seen as unquestionable authority. The archives tell another story. In the Middle Ages, the popes of Rome looked more like monarchs than shepherds. They led wars, arranged dynastic alliances, commanded armies. And the cross was always beside them. But by then it no longer testified to Golgotha. It had become the seal of political power. Everything we were told about the church as the guardian of truth was only half the story. For the church itself often stood in the way of truth. It hid inconvenient texts, branded questioners as heretics, and blessed those who spilled blood in its name. It is a scandal even churches remain silent about. How can it be explained that under the sign of the cross the Inquisition took place? That under this sign people were tortured and burned for daring to think differently? The cross, meant to be a sign of freedom from sin, became a sign of slavery for millions. The prophets warned of this long ago. Jesus said, "They will have the appearance of godliness but deny its power." Is this not about a church that covered itself with crosses yet lost their meaning? And now look at our world today. Do we not see the same pattern? Many churches have turned into corporations. They build empires of real estate, run banks, form political parties. And ordinary believers are used as resources. All of this carried out under the sign of the cross. Official statements are only a mask. They say, "This is charity, this is service." But behind it stand business, money, and control. The real reason for this never made it into textbooks. Because if believers saw how the church used the cross for power, they might turn away. And that is exactly what those who wear the symbol on their robes fear. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. For the church that was meant to stand against empires became an empire itself. It adopted the same methods: control, censorship, punishment. And that is why today the cross stands not beside the church but against it. Because this symbol never belonged to institutions. It has always been the verdict on those who abuse it. Look at the scandals of our time. The world learns of corruption in church leadership, of abuses and crimes hidden for decades. And every time these stories break, we see the same symbol beside them. After that, can we really believe the cross belongs to the church? Or does it judge the church the same way it once judged the empires? This revelation changes everything. Because it reminds us, the cross cannot be privatized. It does not belong to a church, or an empire, or a party. It belongs only to the one who gave his life upon it. And what about you? Can the church today truly speak for the cross, if it has turned it into an instrument of business and power? We were always told that the future would be shaped by technology. But the Bible warns, the final word will belong to a symbol. And among all symbols, it is the cross that will once again become the decisive sign before the end. In the book of Revelation, John sees a banner in the heavens, and the sign of the Son of Man shall appear. For centuries theologians debated what this sign would be. But most of the early interpreters said it plainly, it is the cross. And it will be the very sign seen by all nations before the final judgment. We were taught that the cross was left in the past, in the age of the Roman Empire. In reality, it stands at the very center of the future. It is not a museum relic, not an image on old icons. It is the key to the last events of history. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the Gospel of Matthew, Christ said, "Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn." These are not abstract words. This is a prophecy of the moment when the world will see the cross not as decoration on a church, but as a verdict from the skies. The archives tell another story. Medieval chronicles describe shining crosses in the heavens before wars or disasters. Chroniclers wrote of them as warnings of approaching calamity. And though modern science explains them away as natural phenomena, the fact remains, generations saw the cross not only as a symbol of faith, but as a sign of heavenly judgment. Everything we were told about our present was half the truth. We are told that technology will decide everything, that algorithms will replace politics, that artificial intelligence will be treated like a new god. But at the same time, we see ancient symbols returning with fresh power. Protesters march with crosses in their hands. Armies paint them on their machines. Politicians weave them into their campaigns. The symbol that was supposed to be forgotten is once again decisive. It is a scandal even the churches remain silent about. Because if we admit that the cross is the final sign, then we must admit, the end of history is closer than we are told. And official theology often avoids such direct conclusions. Look at today's world. When Russia launched its aggression, it leaned on orthodox symbols. When the United States speaks of its exceptionalism, it appeals to Christian values. In Europe, far-right movements march with flags bearing crosses. In Israel and in Arab nations, the cross still evokes fear and hostility. All these events prove one thing: the cross did not remain in the past. It shapes the present and prepares us for the future. Official statements are only a mask. Politicians say, the future belongs to science and progress. But when the cross reappears in the public square, it becomes clear, the real battle is not for algorithms but for symbols. The real reason for this never made it into textbooks. Because if it did, we would see, the finale of history will not be technocratic. It will be symbolic. And the central sign will be the cross. The prophets warned, when the nations see this sign, it will be too late to change. It will be the last warning. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. Just as in the past, peoples trembled at heavenly signs, so today we brace for global upheavals. Economic collapse, wars, epidemics, these are only the backdrop. The true drama will begin when the sign appears in the sky. And what if we are the ones living in the days when this prophecy is about to be fulfilled? This revelation changes everything. Because it reminds us, the end will not come quietly. It will come under the sign of the cross. And this sign cannot be ignored. It will be visible to all, to presidents, to armies, to ordinary people. And what about you? Can a world that laughs at symbols today weep before them tomorrow? We were always told that modern politics is built on laws, treaties, and economics. But that is not true. The invisible foundation of every international alliance is symbols. And the greatest of them is still the same, the cross. We were taught that globalization had erased religious signs. In reality, they only changed form. Look at the flags of today's nations and alliances. At the center lies the same ancient archetype. The cross and the flag of Great Britain, in the Scandinavian nations, in Switzerland. The NATO emblem, shaped like a four-pointed cross. These are not coincidences. They are strategy. Official statements are only a mask. Leaders say, "We unite for security, for democracy, for peace." But why, then, do these alliances build their imagery on the same symbols that once defined the empires of the past? The answer is simple. Symbols reach deeper than laws. They shape the subconscious of millions. The archives tell another story. When the European Union was created, one of the main debates was over its symbols. Why did the flag bear 12 stars? It is a biblical image, the crown of the Virgin Mary from the Book of Revelation. Why did NATO choose a design that resembles a four-pointed cross? Because they knew, archetypes bind people more strongly than political agreements. Everything we were told about the neutrality of modern alliances was only half the truth. They are deeply rooted in symbolism we mistake for culture. But in reality, that symbolism defines their political identity. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. In the book of Daniel, a beast with 10 horns is described, gaining authority over all nations. John wrote of a system that would unite states in the last days. And we already see its shape, global alliances cloaked in old symbols, leading toward a new order. Look at today's wars. Russia justifies its aggression with the Orthodox cross. NATO carries out operations under a symbol of protection and peace. Israel fights under the Star of David against peoples for whom the cross is still a sign of hostility. All these conflicts circle back to ancient symbols. The real reason for this never made it into textbooks. Because if it did, we would understand, global alliances are not as rational as they appear. They are driven by archetypes older than politics itself. The shadows of empires rise again. Just as Rome, in its decline, tried to raise the cross as its banner, so today's global alliances do the same. They weave it into their logos, their messages, their ideologies. But history teaches, anyone who tries to claim the symbol of judgment will face the verdict it carries. This revelation changes everything. Because it shows, modern politics is not only about economics and weapons. It is a battle for symbols. And at the center of that battle stands the cross once more. Think about it. What if the wars of the future will not be fought for territory, but for the right to own the symbol? Do we not already see entire alliances trying to make the cross their seal of legitimacy? The prophets warned, when nations unite under a single sign, it will mark the last days. And now we see that this sign may well be the cross, not as a symbol of salvation, but as a symbol of control. And what about you? Can we trust those who raise ancient symbols while promising us a new world order? We were always told that the cross belongs to the past. But that is a lie. The cross belongs to the future. It is the symbol that will mark the final judgment of the whole world. In the book of Revelation it is written, "And all nations shall see him, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn." This is not poetry. It is a verdict. At the very center of that vision stands the cross. It will be the sign that separates truth from lies, life from death. We were taught that the cross is only about personal faith. But prophecy says it will stand as judgment against kings, presidents, corporations, and alliances. No one will be able to escape this sign. The archives tell another story. Early Christian writings describe that at the end of days the cross will once again appear in the heavens, and it will not be ignored. Everyone will see it. And it will not be a church decoration or a pendant around the neck. It will be a heavenly verdict upon all humanity. Everything we were told about the future was only half the truth. We are told that the future will be decided by artificial intelligence, global corporations, or military blocks. But prophecy reminds us, the final word will belong to a symbol. And that symbol is the cross. Look at the world today. It already trembles under disaster. Wars tear across continents. Economies collapse. Nature answers with catastrophe. And in the midst of it all, the cross once again rises as the central mark of politics. It is painted on flags, raised in protests, stamped on military machines. It is already judging the world, dividing it into camps. The prophets warned, when the symbol begins to divide the nations once more, it is the sign of the approaching end. The real reason for this never made it into textbooks. Because if we were told that the cross itself will be the verdict over history, it would shatter the faith people place in political illusions. And the world survives on those illusions. The shadows of empires rise again. And we see the same pattern. Empires try to claim the cross to hold power. But in the end it becomes their verdict. History repeats. This revelation changes everything. Because it reminds us, the cross is not the past, it is the future. And that future is closer than we think. Think about it. What if we are already standing at the threshold of that judgment? We have walked the road from Rome to the empires of today. From secret brotherhoods to global alliances. And everywhere, the same symbol has stood beside them. The cross. It divides history in two, before and after. It judges empires, churches, and nations. It becomes a weapon in the hands of politicians, and a sign of protest in the hands of the people. Again and again, it emerges at the very point where the fate of the world is decided. And it will be the last sign in the heavens, the one all will see. I will not give a final answer. This mystery remains open. But what about you? Leave your comment below. Do you see in this prophecy the same signs that I see? If you noticed any inaccuracies in the text or in the narration, I ask your understanding. This voiceover was created with the help of artificial intelligence, and some details may have been distorted. Write about the mistakes in the comments, and I will be sure to correct them in the next videos.